Hello and welcome to The Future Is Now, a Forbes show of their digital TV channel F15. My name is Camilla Sievers and I am an entrepreneur and under 30 list maker. Today's guest is Mursal Hedayat. She's a member of the British Empire. She's a fellow Forbes 30 under 30. She has been coveted by the Financial Times, MIT, and Forbes. And she's the co-founder of Chatterbox, an edtech and social startup that was founded in 2016. Chatterbox is an online language learning platform for companies and professionals, connecting them with highly skilled refugees. Experts have predicted that over 1 billion people will be displaced by 2050. And currently, there's an enormous labor market inefficiency in the integration of highly skilled and educated refugees. So I'm very excited to welcome her to talk about the future of labor. Hi, Mursal. I'm so happy for you to join us.
I'm so delighted to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
We will have an amazing chat before us. We will be talking about your own journey from refugee to celebrated entrepreneur. We will talk about Chatterbox's journey, how you specifically integrate refugees into the labor market, and how these high-skilled workers can fill voids in the system. And then last but not least, what the future of labor looks like and what will get us there. Before we start with that, I would like to ask you 3 quick intro questions so that the viewers will get to know you a little bit better. And the first one would be, tell us what's your biggest strength and your biggest weakness.
What are my biggest? Okay, I think my biggest strength is probably the same strength that all entrepreneurs around the world need to have, wherever they're from, wherever they are, and that's grit. Not many things bring me down. So I think the entrepreneur journey is so many highs and many, many, many more lows. And if you don't have grit, then you would be run down very quickly. I suppose my biggest weakness is I tend to move very fast. I speak very quickly, and sometimes there's a lag between the things that I want to do and what I think everyone else understands and other people. So part of being a good leader is learning to bring people along. So I think that's something that I'm learning in my current company.
I can relate to that. What's your life philosophy?
I think I'm very influenced by Zen Buddhism. So I think that most of life is brilliant if you pay attention to it. Even the really hard and tough stuff can be eye-opening lessons and rewarding to go through in their own ways. So I guess if I had a philosophy, it would be Zen Buddhism, but I don't subscribe to many of the more exotic beliefs of the system, more just a mindfulness and a appreciation for consciousness.
Mm-hmm. And what's your work philosophy?
My work philosophy is very much to support my team. I think that the biggest output of my company is the work of the people who are part of the Chatterbox family and work across so many different areas that my job is to be a servant leader and trying to help them to do their best for the company.
Amazing. So I have introduced Chatterbox a little bit, but what I would like to know is how your own journey has brought you to build, found, and scale Chatterbox, and where you are right now.
So Chatterbox's journey to existence kind of started in Afghanistan in the early 90s, where my family were refugees, right after the Taliban started to get a stronghold into the country. And we came to the UK, in the early to mid 1990s, at a time when, there were definitely nowhere near as many positive schemes to support the reintegration of refugees into work as there are today. But even still, some of the impacts that they felt in that decade are still felt today by refugees and migrants around the world. And that is that it almost doesn't matter what you're capable of or what your background was before you become displaced. You have to start all over again, whichever country you end up, whether that's a refugee camp in Southern Africa, or whether it's one of the world's leading economies in the UK, like my parents were established in. So I grew up very much recognizing that there's a huge untapped talent pool consisting of people like my parents And so when I graduated from business school and looked to start my own company, that was the first problem that attracted my attention.
So tell us, what is Chatterbox?
Chatterbox is a tool for companies to help them acquire the language skills that they need, as well as the linguistically diverse talent. So we find talent from all over the world, from the refugee community, but also from other communities that are currently invisible to employers. And we bring them into Chatterbox to act as language coaches for some of the largest organizations in the world. But we're also starting to give companies the opportunity to hire directly from our talent pool.
And when you say there is no integration that really works, are we thinking about integrating highly skilled workers who have the knowledge to work, and follow-up questions? We know that there are not enough skilled workers. So why is this so difficult for the government to figure out?
You make a really good point. What not a lot of people recognize is that across Europe, between 12.5% to 20% of refugees have high levels of education and skill. In some countries, it's higher than the native born population. But what I noticed when I started out in this space was to also appreciate that this is one of the harder groups in society to reintegrate into work, because there's a lot more discrimination that they have to battle in the labor market. We're all, I think, kind of at some point or another used to being on the receiving end or the kind of giving end of a harsh rejection for a job. But if your CV doesn't look like the average, if it has a gap or if it has an overseas university, it's even harder for you than the average. And so take the example of my mum, who was a civil engineer in Afghanistan. Today we are desperately trying to graduate engineers around the world almost unanimously. And yet my mother couldn't find a job for 20 years. Only now is she really happy in her new career in language teaching. So she got into a great industry there. But 20 years is too long for her to have been economically inactive. What's also something that I've recognized is it's not just refugees that are impacted by this. We're looking at the fourth industrial revolution. We're looking at huge economic displacement of people, whether they're refugees or not, and are the need to overcome some of these loopholes in the labor market that lead to some really talented people being ignored need to be fully addressed before we can kind of step into the next economy.
So let's talk back to Chatterbox. Your kind of slogan is learn a language, save a life. And how does this integrate into the highly skilled workers that cannot be integrated?
Exactly. So the slogan is learn a language, change a life. Although I wish that we could do as much as possible to save people as much as we help them. But alas, our contributions to their lives are far less significant. And what we do is to channel this huge amount of talent that's arrived in Europe and beyond as refugees or other types of displaced workers into a hugely booming industry, which is online language learning. It sits within an absolutely vast parent market, and thanks to COVID is about to grow by another 22 billion between now and 2024. So it's really an area of huge economic growth. And I think it tells a story of what Chatterbox will continue to do in the future beyond language learning, which is that there are so many opportunities in the online economy and in the new sectors of the economy that are desperately looking for talent. And the population of talent that Chatterbox connects with and supports, whether they're refugees or marginalized people, but equally talented people from other backgrounds, that we can help place them into jobs in that new economy that's unfolding.
And now with all the diversity and inclusion debates going on, do you see a direct impact from this kind of new light that's shone on these topics that help you get new corporate clients?
So we know two things which kind of tell a different story. The first is that 95% of S&P 500 companies publish environmental and social governance documents where they lay out everything that they care about diversity and beyond. At the same time, we know that the proportion of Black and diverse board members in the US and across Europe actually went down. The senior roles occupied by diverse professionals went down, at the same time as Black Lives Matter was capturing the airwaves. So I think there's one thing that people say and perhaps the different way that they behave and the way that they actually work. I think what's been fundamental to our success as an organization is never counting on people doing the right thing because that's the reason they should do it. I'm a huge believer in social enterprise, and I think if you can link social change to capitalism and the economy as kind of the dominant forces in society, then you can do a lot more good than kind of appealing to executives' better natures. But I do think a shift is coming, especially with, you know, our generation, the next generation of industry leaders and professionals. So I look forward to actually seeing some of that rhetoric being translated into action.
Do you think that this will actually happen because stakeholders right now will transform in their own right and society will transform and be more open? Or do you see the same stakeholders doing the same thing that hasn't worked over the last 50 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think the saying is necessity is the mother of invention. I think, as you said, the numbers of refugees and displaced people globally is already at record levels, higher than after the Second World War. And I think the predictions are anywhere between 100 million to even 1 billion forced displaced people over the next few decades. So that is a huge issue to address. And as I mentioned, there's also other sectors of society that are going to be disrupted by not just the impacts of COVID, but automation and all these other changes that are happening in the economy, let alone the world in general. So I think governments are increasingly prioritizing this issue of the need for retraining and the need for reskilling and reintegration of talent into work. And at the same time, we're also looking at a huge talent shortage. So Manpower Group produces a great report every year about the steadily growing divide between the talent that's available and the talent companies need. And I think right now it's over 50% of jobs that companies seek to be filled currently go unfilled because there's a skills deficit, whether it's in engineering or customer service in the economy. So a company like ours is kind of solving that by better matching supply with demand, connecting employers to a group of, you know, people of talent that they previously didn't have access to. And I think that's going to be really powerful. I think government action is also incredibly powerful, and that's why we work with you know, government agencies around Europe and hopefully around the world soon as well to try to address the problem at the root. But in terms of corporates actually stepping forward and solving this problem themselves, they've shown themselves to be woefully kind of under resourced, it seems. But that's why companies like Chatterbox exist. I think there's a brilliant space between companies and governments that private commercial entities like Chatterbox can place to kind of speed up the changes that need to happen.
And now that we looked at chances and the good side of things, where do you see actual threats that could dissolve everything that we've achieved so far?
It's interesting because I think we talked about it a bit earlier, which was to say, you know, discussing just how many crises the world is kind of encountering. It seems like every day there's a new revelation or a new protest about a really important social, environmental or other challenge, both in, you know, European, safe and developed European countries or elsewhere. So we really are reaching a point of peak crisis. And I think that there's also a great hope as well, again, for a new generation of entrepreneur and social change maker to capitalize on the opportunities for good. So I don't think the response seems to be coming from government. I think the response to that kind of pinnacle of crises is going to come from, you know, ordinary people doing their small bit to make the system work better.
And now you've said the new generation of entrepreneurs. It was never as easy to learn anything, to have access to knowledge and information. Do you think one of the drivers of integrating people into society and into their new home country will be to make it as easy as possible for anyone to come and start their own company?
There are really interesting organizations already experimenting with this, and one in particular that I'm excited by is called Talent Beyond Boundaries. And they, I think, a bit like Chatterbox and a bit like me and my co-founder, recognize that, you know, often people don't do the right things because it's right. You have to make it make commercial sense. And so what they're experimenting with is creating migration pathways agreed for with governments, creating new types of visas to allow skilled refugees and skilled workers from more difficult to place locations, let's say, to come to the UK and work as doctors in the NHS, or travel to Canada and work as software engineers for the booming tech industry there. So I do think that, you know, that's one organization definitely to watch in that space. But people are once you get over the discrimination of thinking of refugee and only seeing, you know, an ill-educated person living in a tent who has, you know, only threats to bring to Europe and nothing good. Once you get over that and start to evaluate the massive amount of economic potential that each one of that community represents, then these kind of ideas really start to take off. It's a double change that needs to take place in our mindsets and also in legislation and in the actions of companies.
And looking at discrimination, do you have the feeling that this might be a non-issue within our generation, just because we grew up not having only one information pot, so to speak, that was our village or our school or class or sporting ground, but at the end of the day, really the internet, shows from all over the world, and then in university, like a diverse group of people?
I think you're absolutely spot on. I think perhaps the greatest tool for social cohesion may be Instagram or Facebook, regardless of what you think about the backgrounds of those companies. I mean, look at you and I, you know, we're two people from vastly different backgrounds, but we have so much shared experience and so much shared stories and knowledge of the world. And that really most likely only came from the advent of the internet and that connectivity. And so, without sounding too trite, I think each generation seems to become less and less discriminatory and more educated than the next. It's also a statistical fact. So I think that there's a great sort of change that's already happened around the world and will continue to happen, but only so far as kind of internet can penetrate. And obviously some countries like the Afghanistan, where I'm originally from, you know, the internet penetration can be less than a third of the population. And so you have, in that instance, the potential to also create cleavage between the globalists, you know, maybe you wouldn't call all them elites, but a globalist mindset versus a more local and less exposed mindset.
So what do you think, coming to the end of the main body of this interview and looking at the future of labor, what do you think will be in the near future, the steps that have to be taken to have immediate impact, and where would you like your industry to be in, let's say, a decade or two?
Interesting. So our industry is in language learning. I think language learning is a very important tool to consider for the sort of globally cohesive economy and society that I kind of strive for in my work, because language is increasingly a tool for differentiation, but also a tool for coming closer to each other. So I note with great enthusiasm, I guess, the uptake of English as a world language, and the fact that, you know, we are communicating thanks to there being a lingua franca and our ability to, I guess, kind of share ideas because you know, English language education has spread very far. But on the flip side of that, there's an increasing homogenization of thought and also a imbalance between people brought up around an English-speaking environment and those who are not, which creates a new dimension of inequality. So my hope for the future of the language learning industry is for there to be just as much prominence and you know, enthusiasm about teaching languages other than English and actually creating a diverse and multilingual world instead of a homogenous, you know, English empire by a different medium, because, you know, the languages we speak are, you know, the tools that we use to formulate thoughts, and we don't want everyone thinking the same. So I think that's one important change and important action that people can take and that our company definitely represents.
Great. Thank you so much for your thoughts. I would move on to the last bit where I read you some sentences and you complete them in a general sense. So the first one would be, what do you think the long-term effects of the COVID crisis on the startup scene will be?
The long-term effects will likely be that a few companies like ours that have greatly benefited from the lockdown, Chatterbox being in the edtech space, that we will have an unfair advantage for a short time. But I think now has never been a more exciting time to start thinking about what the future of travel and the future of leisure and retail looks like. So I actually think I'm kind of jealous of the people that solve the problems in that really exciting space.
And what was your philosophy as a child?
If I had a philosophy, it was to read and make things. I thank God I can say this because now it's completely changed. Didn't watch TV at all until the age of 12, and then Charmed and Friends got me. So I think it was to maybe be more of an independent thinker, and by consuming different media.
Amazing. I envision a utopian future as?
I envision a utopian future as one in which people are allowed to travel wherever they like, to start businesses and live their lives in whichever environment suits them best.
And I envision a dystopian future as?
I think that we're pretty close to a dystopian future already. A dystopian future where people can't agree on what's, morally right or wrong, let alone what is really correct and incorrect. So I think we're pretty much verging on that dystopia now.
And a future builder who I should definitely interview on the show is?
This is actually really hard. I don't know. I know so many. Camilla, I will email you lists of hundreds of exciting entrepreneurs I know.
Great. Mursal, thank you so much for all your insights and sharing your thoughts and visions and everything that you've learned, your journey. It was so great to have you. And again, thank you for joining us from London. I thank you for watching. As always, you find everything that we've talked about in the show notes. And we love for you to subscribe our YouTube channel. And I guess I see you next week on another episode of The Future Is Now.